They are the stories that keep you up past your bedtime. Weird Western tales of boogeymen, UFOs, and things that will kill you in the night. What part did technology play in crafting legends that have scared people for generations? In the Wild West, there were some questions you just didn't ask. Questions even technology couldn't answer. The unexplained, next on Wild West Tech. They're here. Howdy, and welcome to Wild West Tech. I'm your host, David Carradine. You know, the West is filled with fascinating tales of life and death, which have no rational explanation. So which ones are true? And how much is fiction? That's for you to decide. As for me, I'm gonna follow that signpost up ahead. Our next stop, Wild West Tech Zone.
It's fascinating to discover how deeply immersed unexplained phenomena and mysteries are in American folklore and culture. Most people tend to think it's a more recent phenomena, that technology was the reason that we started thinking about UFOs and aliens and even a Bigfoot and things like that. But the truth is, history shows it, the record shows it, that even in the biblical period and even in, ancient times, there were depictions of UFOs on cave drawings and things like that.
A lot of the phenomena that took place in those days has since been explained, UFO sightings, whatever, but not all of them.
Indeed, there are several weird Western tales that have never been adequately explained. Tales of death and destruction. Tales of mystery. Tales of the unknown and unknowable.
Flying saucers and those kind of things really weren't reported in the mainstream press in the early part of our country in the 1700s into the early 1800s, not too much. By the late 1800s, there appeared to be something really phenomenal occurring.
Now remember, Will, those access scales need to be 100% certified to make sure.
November 17, 1896, Sacramento, California. It's a dark, rainy night in the California state capital. Assistant Secretary of State George Scott is going about his business when suddenly his business becomes a whole lot less important. A bright light is moving across the sky. To Scott and his companions, it looks to be about 1,000 feet in the air, drifting to the west. Remember, the Wright brothers' flight was still years away. So, the fine folks of Sacramento believed they were being visited by a futuristic airship.
In the fall of 1896, they were talking about a man-made secret craft now under some sort of mechanical control. This predates the Wright brothers, so it was a good mystery of what technology was being discovered or being invented, and who were these people.
The Sacramento sighting wasn't an isolated incident. Soon people from all over the West were reporting similar events in San Francisco, Omaha, even in big Midwestern cities such as Chicago. What was the source of these mysterious lights? One possibility, an airship ripped from the pages of a Jules Verne novel. In the days before the Wright brothers' success at Kitty Hawk, the options for powered flight were severely limited. In 1883, a French inventor made the first flight in a balloon powered by an electric motor. But most of the airships of the time were simple hot air balloons, not that different than the balloons you see today. The Sacramento UFO was something else altogether. Newspaper accounts of the Sacramento sightings describe a machine 150 feet long, apparently able to carry 15 passengers. The mystery ship had 2 canvas wings, each about 18 feet wide, and a rudder in the shape of a bird's tail. Another account added 2 men sitting on a bicycle frame with huge steamship wheels on either side.
With the airship mystery of the late 1800s, there were a few individuals that stepped forward and said they were representing, like lawyers, representing the original inventor, the guy who was going out at night testing this before it really becomes a well-known thing in the culture. He wants to make sure it's working. Every time you thought the scientist was going to come forward, they never did.
If it was a technological advance, a powered dirigible, for example, its inventor preferred to remain in the shadows. Evidence of his invention has been lost in the mists of history. But hundreds of people all over the West saw something buzzing around the skies, and to this day, no one is exactly sure what it was.
So the idea still remains in many UFO researchers' mind that there really was some sort of a real oblong UFO, maybe from another planet, circling the United States in the late 1800s. There's no reason to believe it wasn't.
This wasn't the first flying object to create a sensation in the Wild West. In 1873, a military parade at Fort Riley, Kansas, was disrupted by a shiny metallic disc. The same day, in Bonham, Texas, a shining object buzzing over a farm caused a widespread panic, which actually killed a guy. UFO
There are a number of cowboys that claim to have seen UFOs in the West. In fact, one of them even used the word saucer back in the 1880s, which is kind of interesting.
70 years later, a pilot in Idaho would gain international notoriety and set off a worldwide craze by describing his encounter with a flying saucer. But the term saucer, as used to describe UFOs, originated in the Wild West. One of the best documented early UFO sightings took place on the western frontier. Denison, Texas, January 1878. Farmer John Martin is doing a little evening hunting when he sees a dark object high in the northern sky.
It appears in 1878, this very respectable guy, John Martin, sees what first he thinks is like an orange in the distance. And it sort of comes closer to him and it really goes over his head. He describes it as a saucer.
Eventually, he's almost blinded and has to look away. Something exceedingly strange has flown over John Martin's head, and he has no idea what it was. According to news reports of the day, the object increased considerably in size and appeared to be going through space at a wonderful speed. When directly over him, it was about the size of a large saucer and was evidently at great height.
The Denison Daily News said, and I quote, "Mr. Martin is a gentleman of undoubted veracity, and this strange occurrence, if it was not a balloon, deserves the attention of our scientists." Well, here's an idea. Maybe it wasn't a UFO. Maybe it wasn't a balloon. Maybe Mr. Martin was just having a ball with ball lightning.
Ball lightning consists of bursts of electricity similar to actual lightning. These brightly glowing balls still baffle scientists today. We do know the phenomenon can track along metallic objects, such as telegraph wires, and if concealed by a layer of fog or clouds, it could appear as a distant large object.
Some people think ball lightning was responsible for the bright lights World War II pilots would see trailing their planes just off the wings. The balls looked like fire. And if you'll allow me a little sloppy French, we're called Foo Fighters. But the Americans just called them Foo Fighters. And decades later, Dave Grohl thought it would be a good name for a band. Now you know.
No two ways about it. Ball lightning does some weird stuff.
In the 50s, when they first came out with the electric stove, my grandmother was cooking on one. Cloudy day outside, all of a sudden the lights dimmed and there was a ball of lightning outside the window, passed through the window and hovered above the sink in the kitchen. Something popped really loud and electrical current shot a hole right through the cast iron skillet she was working with at the time on the stove. Frightened the hell out of her.
But ball lightning wasn't behind every UFO sighting in the Wild West. There were a variety of explanations, all a bit more likely than visitors from outer space.
Mysterious lights can commonly be created by decomposition of various woods and things you might find in the forest, marsh gases, for instance. It simply could have been a reflection of light sources from very far away, much like we see today on our highway system.
But what about those little green men? At the turn of the century, advances in telescopes made space the subject of much speculation. The canals on the red planet of Mars were thought to be evidence of an advanced civilization, and Mars was the center of all manner of strange stories.
The fascination with Mars is so in our culture. It goes back to the mid-1800s, when the advent and the discoveries coming out of both using the telescope more, trying to really focus the telescope on planets, trying to figure out what's on planets and whatnot.
December 7th, 1900, Flagstaff, Arizona. Observers are shocked to see what's described as a fountain of light shining on the surface of Mars. Long flashes and short flashes alternate, leading some to believe that a coded message is being sent between the two planets. The codes were seen blinking in the sky for more than an hour and never explained.
You had telescope technology scaring the heavens and Mars specifically because it was red and it was big and you could see it. And then we had guys tinkering with the new radio, newfangled technology. And then we even had scientists saying they had picked up radio signals from Mars.
In the Wild West, it paid to keep your eyes on the sky. July 12, 1873, Kansas City, Missouri. A shower of frogs starts falling. Frogs everywhere, seeming to materialize out of the air. Where did they come from? And how did they end up in Kansas City? Similar stories cropped up all over the West. July 1888, in Palestine, Texas, smooth pebbles started falling to the ground. Later that year, in Brownsville, Texas, nails fell from the sky, along with bits of earth and oyster shells. In Montgomery, California, in February 1890, without warning and apparently without reason, fish start falling from the sky. Nobody knows what species the fish are, or where they come from.
Those strange things falling from the sky stories are pretty universal, and they really do happen. But the idea of frogs raining down on me is something that I'd actually like to see to believe.
So how does a frog end up falling from the sky? The answer may be as simple as the difference between tornadoes and waterspouts. It takes less energy to form a waterspout than a tornado. And when a spout does form, it tends to suck up whatever it comes across. Fish swimming below are usually safe, but amphibians near the surface are going for a ride. And a powerful tornado Just about anything on the ground could get sucked up and sent on a journey, sometimes covering hundreds of miles.
That's a journey through the sky. How about we take a journey to the other side?
Wisconsin, 1865. A young boy named Maxie Hoffman is dying of cholera. The doctor has given him 3 days to live, and the Hoffman family is prepared for the worst. Finally, young Maxie takes what appears to be his last breath. Maxie Hoffman is buried the next day. But his story doesn't end there. No, the story continues. Because Maxie Hoffman has accidentally been buried alive. The apparent death of a young boy named Maxie Hoffman has led to his burial in 1865 Wisconsin. One big problem: Maxie's not dead.
People really were buried alive in those days. There were many cases of, for instance, narcolepsy or something like that. People were mistaken for being dead and actually buried like that, and sometimes they were rescued and sometimes not.
Fortunately for Maxie, he wasn't embalmed because, as previously noted, Maxie Hoffman is still alive.
Well, if someone thought you were dead and you weren't, you would be dead real quick after they embalmed you, because in those days especially they embalmed with arsenic.
The night of his funeral, Maxie's mother is restless, trying to sleep. But she can't find comfort. All she can see is a terrible vision of her son Maxie screaming in the dark. Maxie's mother fears something has gone horribly wrong.
No, he's alive. Maxie.
So the next day, the mother has her husband dig up the coffin which had been buried the day before.
My baby, I know he's alive. I know.
Opening the coffin, they quickly discover Maxie is still breathing. They take the boy out of his coffin and rush him to a doctor. Miraculously, little Maxie Hoffman was still alive. Within a week, he had fully recovered.
Huh. Resilient young lad. Last one I buried didn't come back.
Maxie Hoffman lived a long life. He eventually died at the age of 85. And for all those years, he kept a macabre souvenir of his time in the grave: the metal handles off his coffin. Maxie figured they were a symbol of his good luck.
Being buried alive isn't that much fun. But if it was going to happen in the Wild West, you'd probably want to hang around until 1897. That's when little Maxie would have had a way of letting his loved ones know about their terrible mistake.
After a similar and nearly disastrous burying alive incident, one inventor devised a hermetically sealed coffin with a system of tubes and springs designed to detect movement of the chest. When breathing is detected, a spring releases, letting air and light into the coffin. If that's not enough, a signaling flag is raised, a bell rings, and a lamp is lit, all in an effort to attract the attention of someone in the world of the unburied.
At a certain time when the population's fears of being buried alive reached an all-time high, the undertaking business took it upon themselves to sell contraptions that would enable you to be rescued if you found yourself awake all of a sudden in a pine box. They included bells and whistles and various things that could reach above the surface and alert those who were still walking among the living that you were as well.
Sometimes stories of the unexplained became legendary, and some even have connections to the legends of the land.
How do you explain thunder and lightning? Native people at the time didn't have the vast knowledge that we have today of how to explain certain things. And so what Native people would do, they would make stories that would give you a possible explanation, and everything was related to nature.
The story of the Thunderbird crosses over among Pacific Northwest, Plains, and Northeast tribes alike. The name has become so common today we think of it as a car, a liquor, or even the most highly trained pilots in the U.S. Air Force. But what did the real Thunderbird supposedly look like? Different tribes had different interpretations, but many elements were similar.
It's a large bird-like animal that when he flaps his wings causes thunder. A good representation would be in the Northwest Coast cultures where you see the totem poles. The top animal on the totem pole is usually the Thunderbird.
A few white men claimed to have actually seen a Thunderbird, but no one was able to produce evidence that the bird existed. But there was one story that just wouldn't die.
In 1892, a newspaper story appeared in the Tombstone Epitaph detailing the sighting of a winged alligator. And this is also known as the Thunderbird.
This is one of those great stories that may involve confabulation and may involve kind of like everyone adding to the story as it goes, and the newspapers get involved and they create entertainment. Two cowboys claim that they saw this Thunderbird, this 90-foot wingspan creature with every kind of weird feature you could name.
The ranchers said the monster indeed looked like a huge alligator with wings. The beast was flying low, almost taunting and challenging the ranchers. And the ranchers knew if the Thunderbird turned on them, they'd be toast. A story in the Tombstone Epitaph paints a frightening picture. Outside the city limits in 1890, two ranchers are said to have come into contact with the legendary Thunderbird, a huge alligator with wings popularized in Native American mythology. After coming under attack from the creature, the ranchers said they had no choice but to take aim at the Thunderbird and shoot it down.
Sounds like these boys were shooting down more than a little Thunderbird, if you catch my drift.
They killed it, shot it, and it was just a scary looking thing, and they took a piece of the wing, cut the wing off, and brought it to the Tombstone newspaper.
So if it was shot down, what happened to the body? That's where this story of the unexplained starts to get more than just a little murky.
Not one piece of evidence seems to support this. They don't have any photographs. They don't have anything. Maybe by the 1930s it was revived again by a local journalist, and it continues, and it got completely written about.
Other versions claim that at about the same time, a photograph was taken of a huge winged creature, presumably the Thunderbird, and published in the Tombstone newspaper.
Somewhere in the mix, a photograph is found or made. No one ever knows what to make of the photograph. And so it really becomes a moment where you look at the way the press has taken two cowboys' account and made it into this story. And if it wasn't for this photograph of these Civil War type guys, which doesn't seem to match the cowboy story exactly either, you would probably see this relegated to like, come on, campfire stuff.
One persistent tale of the unexplained in the West involves the number of stories surrounding various ape-like creatures. The Inuit people swear a hairy man lives on the tundra of southwest Alaska.
We've got a hairy man in my family, too. My cousin, Larry Carradine. For Christmas, the family went in on a gift certificate for a back waxing. Ow!
Another member of the hairy man family, the Algonquin legend of the Wendigo. It's said a Wendigo was a man who turned to cannibalism as a survival method and paid the price by transforming into a horrifying creature with a heart of ice.
The Wendigo mystery seems to be a creature that is sort of half devil, half beast. Doesn't seem to have kind of an anatomy that matches anything one thing, but it sort of has huge claws. It can rip you apart.
Any human who ate the flesh of another began a horrifying transformation, slowly becoming a Wendigo with a taste for human flesh. How strong was the belief in this creature? In Canada, several people were put on trial at the turn of the 20th century. Their alleged crime being a flesh-eating Wendigo.
You solemnly swear.
I can hear the defense attorney now. If the flesh wasn't eaten, the charge must be beaten.
The story of the Wendigo was really a lesson to be learned. Only people who turned to cannibalism turned into this creature. So it was a very important lesson to be learned not to eat the meat of man.
The story of the Wendigo spread far and wide and eventually attracted some high-profile attention.
The Wendigo description seemed to be a little bit mixed, but the one time the Wendigo got really solid reporting and taken very, very seriously was by a guy who eventually became president of the United States.
As a greenhorn cowboy in the American West, Theodore Roosevelt was told many stories over many campfires, the Wendigo being one. But one really great thing about Roosevelt is he took every story to heart. And he loved the American West, and he loved the tales that came with the people. So to doubt him, not at all.
In his book, The Wilderness Hunter, Teddy Roosevelt told a scary Wendigo tale he picked up on the western frontier. Roosevelt said the story came to him from a man named Bauman, who insisted his friend was killed by a half-man, half-beast creature during a hunting trip. Here's the tale T.R. told. Bauman and his buddy are hunting along the Salmon River on the border of Idaho and Montana. They proceeded on their journey despite reports that a year earlier, a man had been killed in the same area, ripped apart by an unknown beast.
Bauman and his friend are out there doing their thing, trapping, and they find near their campsite what appear to be tracks.
Soon, the tracks lead them to a scene of destruction. They find their camp in shambles. And they're both thinking the same thing. Has the beast responsible for the mystery killing returned? Bauman's companion examines the tracks left by the invader. He thinks they look like bear tracks. But further examination doesn't bear that out. The tracks indicate a creature walking on 2 feet, not 4, has done the damage in camp before scampering away. That night, a sound in the woods makes the men think the invader has returned. Bauman and his partner then make a horror movie mistake. They decide to split up.
No. Why do they always split up?
Bauman goes to empty the beaver traps for the last time while his partner packs up camp and prepares to head out. The poor man Bauman leaves behind has no way of knowing. Camp is about to be closed for good. Mysterious noises, unexplained tracks. Things are getting scary in the Idaho backwoods. A man named Bauman leaves his hunting partner at base camp, and that man becomes dinner. When Bauman returned to the camp, he was greeted with a gruesome sight. The camp was packed up all right, but his partner was dead.
Well, Bauman is horrified to find his friend dead mysteriously. The creature put a claw mark into his throat, or fang mark, no one seems to know, and left him to die. So, finding the body in such a way and looking at a mark into the neck and the neck broken indicated that there was some kind of homicide here. That it was a creature smart enough to kind of come in quietly, undetected, and kill his friend.
Combined with stories of a previous Wendigo attack in the area, Bauman was convinced the killing could only have been carried out by a supernatural beast. The fang marks on his partner's neck didn't look like anything Bauman was familiar with, and he knows that whatever killed his partner could come back for him at any time. Bauman escapes with his life and a fantastic tale to tell Theodore Roosevelt.
So what was it that killed Bauman's trapping buddy? Advances in science and forensic technology seem to point to a culprit, and it's not a Wendigo. It seems most likely that two animals were involved in the attack.
A black bear was most likely responsible for the destruction of the camp and the numerous human-like tracks. Bears can walk on 2 feet for periods of time, and that would explain part of the crime scene. But given the bite marks left on the victim's neck, the killing was probably the work of a vicious cougar. If you combine the actions of these two common animals to a single beast, you've got a recipe for a fantastic tale of the unexplained.
In the Northwest coast, you have a lot of instances of where there are animals that cannot be explained.
Which leads us to another unexplained tale and a true legend of the West, Bigfoot.
Bigfoot seems to be just about everywhere there's a remote mountainous area, as far as I can tell, from the Himalayas to the Pacific Northwest. You find Bigfoot just about everywhere. He's a popular guy.
It wasn't uncommon for miners, even in the mid-19th century, to come across these beasts. They would destroy their camps, they would attack them personally. These men would come back with riches and gold, but also tales and warnings not to enter this territory.
Sightings of a Bigfoot-like animal stretch way back in the Wild West.
There is no doubt that when we came to this country and we settled the United States of America, that the Indians that were here way before us had a strong, strong connection to the Sasquatch. This hairy, man-ape-like beast that they connected to a lot of wonderment in every way, shape, and form.
Pioneer missionary Elkanah Walker, living near Mount St. Helens in Washington State, wrote of the Spokane Indians' encounters with a Bigfoot-like creature around 1840. The Spokane described the animal as a giant with 1.5 foot long tracks and a terrible smell. Walker also wrote of the creatures eating salmon from the Indians' fishing nets, raw like a bear.
Hey, I like sushi too. That doesn't make me a monster.
July 1924 in southwest Washington State. Fred Beck is a miner looking for riches. What he finds instead becomes one of the most detailed encounters between humans and Bigfoot ever recorded.
Them damn beasts are out there, so you have to be careful.
Beck and his partners have seen unexplained tracks and heard scary sounds at night for almost a week. Now, holed up in a cabin for safety, Beck and his fellow miners hear a series of loud, thumping sounds. Their cabin is under attack, and doing the attacking, a bunch of huge, hairy apes. Beck and his partners get a look at the creatures hurling huge boulders toward their cabin. One of the monsters reaches through a hole in the cabin wall and tries to grab Beck before the other miners drive the beast away. The attack launches the Great Ape Hunt of 1924, with law enforcement officers and journalists alike rushing to the scene of the attack. They find plenty of giant footprints, but nothing else. Whatever attacked Beck and his party has escaped back into the woods.
One of the nice things about the Great Ape Hunt mystery is that it looked like there was a group more than one. It wasn't just one creature walking by going, hello. The idea is there would never be one creature. You couldn't keep a race going of any humanoid or monkey-like creature or anything in between without a small, at least a small, reproducing family.
And that has always been one of the chief scientific arguments against the existence of Bigfoot. For the creature to continue to live and thrive for any length of time, there would need to be a sizable, genetically diverse breeding population.
There's nothing worse than an inbred Bigfoot.
In addition to the lack of any physical evidence except for plaster casts of alleged footprints, no one has ever brought back a Bigfoot hide or Bigfoot bones. And the woods aren't exactly filled with Bigfoot droppings.
Maybe Bigfoot doesn't, go in the woods. But to this day, there are plenty of people who believe that Bigfoot is still out there, just waiting for us to find him.
Texas, 1833. A group of pioneers trek across the vast plains in search of a better life.
You have to remember, this is a time before the Texas Rangers. This is a time before Texas independence. It was a very, very violent place to live. There was a transplanted Missouri pioneer named Josiah Wilbarger thinking about relocating to Texas.
Suddenly, though, Wilbarger's trip took an unexpected turn for the worse. Indians intercepted the party and attacked.
Wilbarger took a bullet to the neck, arrows to the legs, and was left for dead by the rest of his party, at which time he was scalped and passed out.
So there he was, Josiah Wilbarger, left for dead, his blood slowly staining the Texas soil. And yet, things were about to get worse. Wilbarger's scalp has been carved open, and now maggots are making themselves at home in the gash. The maggots are causing Wilbarger nearly unbearable pain. But today, scientists would see the maggots as a key clue in determining what happened and when. It's a technique now used by forensic scientists. The number and development of maggots in a dead body can often be used to set a time of death. But if you're still alive when the maggots start to breed inside you, you're in deep trouble. Wilbarger was quickly nearing the sweet relief of death at last when he saw a vision.
Wilbarger sees a vision of his sister Margaret, and his sister tells him help will be on the way. He just needs to hold out a little longer. Of course, at this time, he's got blood loss. He's got maggots in his skull where they creased his skull. He's in a lot of pain and thinks he's on his way out.
A few miles away, a woman named Sarah Hornsby suddenly bolted straight upright. She had been having a terrible nightmare involving a bloody man hanging on for dear life.
Sarah Hornsby has a dream, wakes up in a cold sweat and tells her husband there's a man outside and he needs our help. And of course, the man goes back to sleep.
Men.
But the next morning, Sarah urges her husband to begin a search of the nearby area.
In the morning, Hornsby moved out and did indeed find Wilbarger alive and well.
Wilbarger was rescued and survived, although his scalp was permanently damaged. He wanted to talk to his sister Margaret to tell her about the vision, how he'd seen her appear before him, but that wasn't going to be possible.
When they brought him back and he was recovering at the Hornsby residence, he was shocked to discover that his sister Margaret in Missouri had died on the same night that he'd been scalped and left for dead.
Did the ghost of Margaret Wilbarger save her brother's life? It sure seemed that way. Tales of the unexplained in the Wild West carry on to this day.
Some years ago, a friend of mine who's a psychic was driving past my home in Lincoln, New Mexico, which is blood-soaked ground, to say the least. And her daughter, who apparently inherited the gift, began to scream that there was a man floating in the field just east of my house. And she begged her mom not to turn around and go back and look, so her mom didn't. And about a month later, I was allowed to ask the child, who had finally calmed down. She gave me a pretty good description of a Hispanic gentleman, and I, just for fun, researched it and found out that almost on that exact location in 1884, there'd been an Hispanic gentleman who was murdered for his money.
Communication between the dead and the living was of great interest in the Wild West. No less an authority than Thomas Edison reportedly believed that one day humans could build a machine to communicate with the dead, a technological solution to a purely mystical problem. Unfortunately, Edison was never able to construct such a device, and tales of communication with the great beyond must, for now, remain unexplained.
The wisdom of the elders, doesn't end when they die, and so you want to keep that avenue of communication open. So I would say that's possible.
Unexplained phenomena has been a core belief and interest in our culture for as long as I guess we've been around as human beings.
As for the world of the supernatural, sometimes seeing is believing. But for others, the absence of proof is too great a hurdle to overcome.
I think much of the phenomena from the Wild West, at least the supernatural phenomena, can be explained at this point in time by science and technology, but not all of them.
When you look at the reports of the 1800s and the flying aircraft mystery, you're really taken, if you study the phenomena like I have, by the early debunking. It might be swamp gas. It might be Venus. It might be ball lightning. You know what? If you can't explain what's in the sky, it's got to be one of these things.
But some things defy explanation and simply must be taken for what they are, unexplained.
I can't discount the existence of ghosts. I certainly would remain skeptical until I see any solid evidence, but I can't certainly discount them.
Whether it's a good ghost story or a Bigfoot attack, the Wild West was filled with strange tales. Some of those stories can never be explained. Others probably shouldn't be. After all, what fun is life without a little mystery? I'm David Carradine. See you next time for more Wild West Tech. Guess he had to go.